クロスディグワンオンワン始まります。今日のテーマは倫理的野心を持て、みんなの才能をどうすれば世界を良くすることに使えるかです。3つに分けて話を聞いていきたいと思います。1つ目、なぜ世界は未だにクソ最悪なのか、みんなの才能を生かしきれてない。2つ目、良い人×戦略が世界を救う。そして3つ目、今日から倫理的野心を持てです。ゲストは歴史家ジャーナリストのルトガー・ブレックマンさんです。最近この倫理的野心を持てという本を書きました。ヒューマンカインドを書いたベストセラー作家ですね。非常に注目されている知識人の一人なので、今日はルトガー・ブレックマンさんに直接話を聞いてみたいと思います。早速ご本人をお呼びします。So Rutger Bregman, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be with you.
Yes, so I just read your wonderful book, Moral Ambition. Are you excited about the Japanese edition?
I am extremely excited about it. My Japanese readers have always been amazing. Ever since my very first book, Utopia for Realists, I loved visiting Japan back in 2017. So I can't wait to, hear what Japanese readers think of this one because it builds on all my previous books.
I guess so, because I think the Japanese people love the talking moral, but it's interesting that you combine moral with ambition. So I'd like to talk to you about this today.
Sure, it's somewhat of an unusual combination, but I think it's an incredibly important thing we need right now. So moral ambition is pretty simple, actually. It is the combination of the idealism of, let's say, an activist and the ambition of an entrepreneur. It is the desire to make this world a wildly better place, to use what you have, your time, your talent, your resources, to make the biggest possible difference.
Interesting. So you should be not only a good person, but also a strategist. I talked to you 2 years ago, and I think the world has become, unfortunately, crazier than before. What's happening in Iran, we haven't solved climate crisis yet. So we have these smart people, we have artificial intelligence, all the technology, but why is the world not becoming a better place?
I think we are living at a hinge point in history. I think that the next 5 to 10 years are going to be some of the wildest years in all of human history. And I am really hesitant to say this because I'm trained as a historian. I'm very aware that people often suffer from something called chronocentrism, right? People often think that the time they happen to be alive is the most important moment. That is often not true. But this time is really different. And it is different because of two reasons. The first one is the decay of the international global order. We see it collapsing all around. US hegemony, the notion that we had a rules-based international order. We just see the rise of autocracy everywhere. And in the US, I would even call it a form of neo-fascism. And then at the same time, we are in the midst of an extraordinary, profound technological revolution. And I still think that a lot of people don't realize how profound it really is. I think that often when people, hear the big promises of Silicon Valley, they're like, maybe it is like blockchain, maybe it is like the NFTs, maybe it is like the metaverse, it will be another one of those big stories, another one of those bubbles that will collapse. But no, AI is really different. I think it is going to change everything. It is already changing everything. I have multiple wow moments every week right now. But I mean, this is just the beginning. The questions that AI raises are going to be much more profound. The whole social contract will have to be rewritten. The way things work right now, where people work for their money, they pay taxes, that's their contribution, that's how they participate in the social contract, then they, have the right to vote, can choose their own leaders. All of that is under threat right now because we used to have a situation with sovereign nations. Then we went to a situation with sovereign companies, and now we're moving towards a situation with sovereign individuals, where just the CEOs of the tech companies accumulate so much power that the question is really, can democracy survive in an age like this?
I agree, because I think there's a power shift from nation state to an individual, or maybe an individual with AI. So
Yeah.
let's go back to your point. You made 2 points, which is very interesting. That number one, the world is collapsing; it's a mess, and number two, we have this awesome technology. So why are we not using this awesome technology to empower ourselves to fix those problems?
It's a big question. A couple of things. So often when I look at people on, let's say, the left-wing progressive side of the political spectrum, I kind of want to scream at them. I think a lot of them have their head in the sand and they have no idea what's coming. A lot of my friends, academics, pundits, they're still thinking that, oh, this is just advanced autocomplete. It's just a stochastic parrot, as they say. They don't realize what it is already able to do and what it will be able to do in the future. So that is one reason. The other reason is that the dystopian potential of this technology is so vast. Look, I have spent pretty much my whole career thinking about how we can make this world a wildly better place, right?
Yes.
My very first book, Utopia for Realists. I remember very well when I first came to Japan and had the honor, to talk to Japanese readers about that book. It was about ideas like a universal basic income,
yes,
right? So that when the robots would do the work, we would all get the income so that we can actually live our lives. I am still very much in favor of such ambitious plans. It's just that it is very late right now, and I'm kind of sad, but not a lot of people have been listening to me in the last 10 years. I mean, that book was already full of, again and again, I was emphasizing, this is coming, people. We got to prepare ourselves. But now it's pretty late. I think that we're just in a really bad situation where the accumulation of power is enormous. The race is speeding up and the risks are immense. So one of the most important things to do right now is to just slow down. Honestly, I think that is one of the most important imperatives right now. And that's what it means to be morally ambitious in this space right now.
So how can we slow down?
I think we can do that in a couple of ways. The analogy that I used in a recent lecture is the analogy to the temperance movement. So in the 19th century in the West, you had three big moral movements. The first movement was the fight against slavery. The second movement was the fight for women's rights. And the third one was the temperance movement. Now, everyone remembers the first two movements, but everyone has forgotten the third. The temperance movement was a movement against big alcohol. So at the time in the United States, alcohol was extremely cheap. Huge amounts of men were extremely addicted. They spent almost all their money on alcohol and then came home and beat up their wives, and there were terrible deaths. Then what happened is that a movement arose against that. I call it the first big addiction industry. Just as people are addicted to social media today, back then people were addicted to alcohol. And what happened is that a huge bipartisan movement, people from the left to the right, workers to Orthodox Christians and evangelicals, they united in one big movement. And the main thing they wanted, well, it was to stop big alcohol. It kind of escalated, I have to say. So you probably remember from history class that at some point they passed prohibition in the United States. So it became completely illegal to even sell alcohol. That was, taking things a little bit too far in my view. Yeah. But it shows you the power of this kind of movement. And my prediction is that this is just starting to happen. So what you see in poll after poll in the United States, in Europe, in Japan, is that people are scared. And the salience of AI and AI safety is increasing. So in the US, people are already more worried than about AI than about global warming, which is a pretty profound thing. I think the next elections, the midterm elections, will be the first AI elections. I think that the presidential elections in 2028 will mostly be around AI. So it is by far the most important thing that's happening right now. And a lot of people are deeply, deeply skeptical. And now is the time to leverage their power, because if we're too late, 10 years from now, you might not have that power anymore.
So how can we use that power? Because in your book, you discuss a lot about talent and allocating talent because you argue that a lot of people are not using talent in an effective way. For instance, really smart, talented people, they're going to Silicon Valley creating social media apps or X or Facebook or Instagram, which are only making people addicted. How can we use that talent, or maybe the viewers of this podcast, to use their skills to make the world a better place?
The greatest waste of our time is the waste of talent. There are millions and millions of people who are currently stuck in jobs that don't really make the world a better place. They're sometimes described as the BS jobs. People who can go on strike. Yeah. Not sure if I was allowed to say that.
It's an academic term, so. Yeah.
But yeah, and very often these people have incredible resumes. They went to some of the best universities. So take a place like Harvard University. I was recently there, and you discover that around 50% of Harvard graduates end up either in finance or consultancy or work for big tech. And very often they think that their own job is kind of socially meaningless. So that is a huge waste, because we actually need these people to tackle some of the greatest challenges, whether that is the breakdown of the climate, or the way our democracy is threatened, or the risk of the next pandemic. We need our best and brightest. We need the most talented, smartest people to work on the biggest challenges. So that's the first thing I've always been obsessed with. The second thing is the simple insight that small groups of very thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. So history is not just governed by the big laws, by the big structures. No, it is also sometimes governed by small groups of really determined people, for better or for worse. So if you look around at the group in Silicon Valley, the PayPal mafia, the group around Peter Thiel, the venture capitalist, and around Elon Musk, it's a very small group, but they've been extremely influential, built these huge companies from Palantir to Meta to SpaceX. So it's an example of how small groups of really ambitious, dedicated people can make a massive difference. And we can also use that power for good, in my view. So what I do in my work is that I look at a lot of historical examples where people were able to do this, whether that's abolitionism, the fight against the slave trade, or the rise of social democracy, those who build out the welfare state. Again and again, it is small groups of really committed people who make the difference. And this book is basically a rallying cry for those people around the globe. I'm basically inviting people to join one of those groups and to stop being a bystander and actually join the fight in the arena.
I totally agree with you, because I've heard of the 3.5% rule. If in the world to change, only 3.5% can start to change. Do you see that happening, or do you think it's just 0% right now and people have to start reading your book and start to change?
I think we are seeing the beginnings of a shift. So I think there are a lot of people right now who walk around with a hole in their soul, a hole where meaning used to be. And for centuries, religions were able to provide the scaffolding. Religions were able to provide a sense of belonging, a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose. They were able to answer the big questions of human existence. Where do we come from? Where do we go? Why are we here? How should we live? What is sacred, right? Those are the most important questions that we humans have to answer during our time on this planet. And the old answers don't work anymore. So a lot of people are restless. They're looking for new answers. And this is partially what we're trying to do with the organization that I co-founded, called the School for Moral Ambition, that we launched at the same time as we launched our book. And the growth of it has just been incredible to witness. So in just 2 years, we got 25,000 members from more than 140 countries, hundreds in Japan as well. And I think that'll only grow as the book comes out there. And all these people, they're looking for something more. They don't just want to talk the talk. They want to walk the walk. They don't want to be bystanders and look on as, things deteriorate. They want to take their own responsibility. And that is obviously very encouraging to see. It's just that we need much more of it.
So let's go on to the second part of this show. Ideals need strategy. So we talked about your title is such an interesting title because moral ambitions. So for me, or even Japanese readers, moral means becoming like a perfect person. You have to be a very good person. Is that what you're stating? Or do you think it's not just being a good person, but also a person with realistic strategy? You know, can you elaborate on that?
So in the fight against injustice, whether that is the exploitation of people or of animals, what really matters is that you are actually effective, that you actually make a difference. You really don't want to be what I call the noble losers. You know, noble losers are those people who, you know, may happen to be right, they may happen to be correct, but they don't actually win. And that's why one of the chapters in this book is called Winning is a Moral Duty.
Yes.
Right? The reason we remember people like Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks is not just because they were courageous, it's also because they won, right? Because they were able to push 4 huge packages of legislation through American Congress and, you know, won a decisive battle in the fight against American segregation. If I look at a lot of progressive movements today and progressive movements in the last 10 years, I see a lot of noble losers, if I'm honest. I see a lot of people who were very happy to stand on the right side of history, but who didn't actually achieve much. So I'll give you a famous or infamous example from the United States. You'll remember this, the Black Lives Matter movement.
Right.
It was the biggest movement in the history of the country. Tens of millions of people joined, but they pretty much achieved nothing, right? There's no major legislation that came out of that. And actually, you could argue that there was a big backlash against it.
Yes.
And the whole rise of Trump can partially be explained by what is sometimes called the Great Awakening. You know, all these people becoming very woke. If you are morally serious, you're obsessed with actually achieving results.
So is it because, you know, Black Lives Matter, there was social media and people were just posting comments on social media. Instead of Rosa Parks, she went on the bus, or Martin Luther King Jr., he did a speech, he did a march. Is it the difference between social media and real actions, or is there something different between the two events?
Yes. So one of the illusions that noble losers have is they think that awareness is very important. I always like to say that awareness is very overrated. So a lot of people know about the great problems that we face as a species. I'll give you one of my favorite examples. A lot of people know that the way we treat animals is really bad, right? A lot of people who do even 10 minutes of research into factory farms and the way we treat pigs and the way we treat chickens, they're like, ooh, this is really bad. It's just that they choose to ignore it. They choose not to think about it because it is kind of uncomfortable to think about it. Because if you really think about it, then you realize you got to do something about it. And action is hard. In this social media age, it is very easy to post something on Instagram, post something on Facebook or X or whatever social medium you prefer. To have the feeling that you made a difference, right? But that is just a first step, maybe. What really matters is actually doing something about all these things. And if we look at the movements of, say, half a century ago, they didn't have social media, obviously. So they needed to build a very big infrastructure to organize something like a march on Washington. That meant that people had a lot of face-to-face contact, right? There was a lot of work to do to actually gather all these people. But today you can send out a message on social media, and then millions of people could be there for your big protest the next day. But then it also very quickly disappears because there's nothing connecting all these people, right? There is no infrastructure, and building the infrastructure is hard. That just takes a lot of work.
Do you think we need time or face-to-face communication to build that infrastructure? That is the important,
Yes,
crucial
absolutely.
thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we talked about my obsession with, small groups that changed the course of history. I've always been really interested in those groups on the right-wing side of the political spectrum. So if I can give a few examples from the US again, the Federalist Society was a group that started in the 1980s, and they pumped the whole judicial system full of their people. They knew it was going to take years and years and years, but eventually many of these people ended up on the Supreme Court. And that is partially how they were able to destroy Roe v. Wade, which was the federal, right to abortion. It was a decades-long battle. But even though I disagree with their political goals, I admire that perseverance. Mm-hmm. And then if I look at the other side of the political spectrum, I don't see that perseverance. I don't see that institution building. I don't see many philanthropists, for example, or donors who don't think in election cycles, but think in generations. I think we need much more long-term thinking there and long-term ambition to realize that we are part of something way, way bigger. So my two favorite examples are on the other side are always, the fight against the slave trade and the fight for women's rights. Well, the most successful abolitionist movement was in Britain, actually, in the United Kingdom. And of the 12 founders of the British Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade, which was founded in 1787, only one was still alive when slavery was finally abolished across the British Empire. So that is what it takes. You need an enormous amount of perseverance. And the odds are pretty high that you won't even be around when your team is finally victorious.
So, people hate liberals, the media, everywhere in the world. Do you think the media or liberals, or they're not trying hard enough? They're just talking and not trying hard enough to build that organization.
What is happening now is that something that we took for granted for many years, the post-war liberal social democratic order, is increasingly becoming the new resistance. So after the Second World War, after the enormous destruction around the globe, after the terrible atrocities that were committed, people came together and they crafted this document called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so many nations around the globe signed it. It was an extraordinary moment because this document was extremely utopian, right? It had all these aspirations about what we would do for people as individuals and what we would do to guarantee their rights. But what happened is that over the decades, we kind of became lazy, especially after the fall of the Berlin Wall. People started to think that they had arrived at the end of history.
Yes.
And that as long as economic growth would continue, that slowly all other countries would become more democratic as well. That China, would become more democratic because once they would have, smartphones and social media, surely they would realize that there's only one way, and that is the American way. Well, that was a complete and total illusion. I think Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, said it really well at the World Economic Forum earlier this year in Davos.
Yes.
This era is over and it is not coming back. Those who still believe in the values of liberal democracy, countries like Canada, continents like Europe or the European Union, countries like Japan, we are the new resistance. We're not the most powerful, sadly. We're not China. We're not the US. We are being squeezed by the great powers. And what we need to do right now is to be dead serious about what we actually think. We need to band together. We need to improve our leverage. We need to build our militaries. We need to strengthen our countries. All kinds of things that were unthinkable for a long time should be thinkable right now. Yesterday I was talking to Die Zeit, the big German newspaper.
Yeah.
And I said, Germany should really consider building nuclear weapons right now. That's something I never would have said, 10 years ago. But I think that's absolutely crucial right now. The free world should be able to defend itself. It should be able to withstand pressure from the bullies around the globe. And we cannot rely on America anymore. We have been betrayed by the US, and now we need to rely on ourselves.
It's interesting because nuclear weapons are also a sensitive topic in Japan, and the media and the liberals are it's difficult to discuss, but we can't be lazy. We need to challenge ourselves and think from scratch.
Yes. And I completely understand, obviously, that especially in Japan, this is an extremely sensitive topic. But we also need the self-confidence, right? In a world where, we are increasingly going back to the law of the jungle, right? You see it with the war in Iran, right? What does that war purpose does it even serve, right? It is just the authoritarian neo-fascist dynamic where the president of the United States is like, well, I just want to do that. We can't rely on countries like that as our partners anymore. And Japan lived under that umbrella, obviously, for a long time, but it is gone. We need to wake up. And I would also, as a Dutchman, I would much rather trust on, a dependency of Japan, a country that has an incredible tradition after the Second World War of governance, of democracy. Like we should hold each other very closely because it's getting dark out there. Winter is coming, and we all need to wake up.
Thank you. Let's go to the final part. How can we become a person with moral ambitions? So your book and the talk today personally struck me because when I last talked to you, I was in a startup and I pivoted my career. Right now, I'm at TBS, a very huge national TV organization. I'm trying to change this company. I want to make this company digital. So I'm saying every day that we should go digital, but people think that I'm right, but it takes time to build institution and change something. So could you give me advice or our viewers advice? How we can be idealistic, but at the same time being realistic and being a strategist?
I will be the last one to deny that it's really hard to change a big media organization from the inside. That is really hard.
Okay.
So I would say what you need is a startup within a big organization like that. You need to gather your own small cult, if you will, of really committed, really ambitious, really dedicated people who will just start something inside that Moloch. And then hopefully it can spread from there. Look, I don't think there's like one way to change the world. Obviously not. Like sometimes you just need to start from scratch because the old models are broken. But sometimes entrepreneurship can actually work, right? Sometimes people are effective at changing big corporations or big organizations from within. It's really hard, but some people have been successful at it. Moral ambition is just about using what you have, right? Whether that's your time or your talent or your financial capital to make a very big difference, to be kind of, I like to call it morally greedy, right? Some people may say, look, that's not for me. I'm just an ordinary human being. But if you study the biographies, if you read the memoirs of the great figures of history, you actually realize they were just like us. They're ordinary people.
Yes.
Moral ambition is not some kind of thing you are born with. It is actually an idea. It's a contagious idea, right? And you can get infected with it.
So do you think in a way we're not ambitious enough because instead of building cathedrals or starting a civil rights movement, we're only building those tiny apps?
Yes. And here's where the Netherlands, where I'm from, and Japan have something in common, right? I think both our countries, both our cultures suffer from what is sometimes called tall poppy syndrome. Or in the Netherlands, we call it the hayfield culture. As soon as you stick your head out, above the hayfield, we chop it off. Okay. It's culturally hard to be ambitious in both the Netherlands and Japan. And that is, I think, one of the reasons why, for example, all the big tech companies are in the US. I recently lived in the US for a year, and there's many things you can say about what's wrong with that country, but they do have a culture of ambition, right? They do have a culture of dreaming big. And I think we need more and more of that attitude. You could say that in America, it has become illegal to be moral, But in Europe and Japan, it's often illegal to be ambitious. So we should give people the social license to dream bigger, to have much more ambition, because that ambition is such precious creative energy that we should try and channel in the right direction.
So moral and ambition, what's the best mix? 50%, 50%, or what's your advice?
I would say 100% and 100%. Yeah. No, look, I'm saying that life is about many things, right? So I'm not saying that being morally ambitious is the only way to live a good life. There are many ways to live a good life. I'm also not saying that your moral ambition should suck up everything. I am a dad. I've got a 4-year-old. I've got a 1-year-old. Being a good dad is extremely important to me. Being a good husband is extremely important to me. But I will also say that there are trade-offs. Let me tell you the story of my favorite hero in all of world history. This was a young man named Thomas Clarkson. He was a student at Cambridge University in the United Kingdom. And when he was 25, he participated in an essay contest. And by chance, the question that the students had to answer was, is it okay, is it morally defensible to own and sell other human beings? Is slavery okay? And he had never really thought about the question. But then he started writing the essay and he realized, well, it's actually really bad. He wrote the whole thing, won first prize. And then there was this famous moment. In the summer of 1785, he was on his horse from Cambridge, where he would just receive the award, to London, where he lived. And he was near the village of Waitsmill, a small, tiny village. And he kept thinking about what he had just written. And then he realized, but wait a minute. If this is true, if slavery is actually a profound moral atrocity, then someone should do something about this. He spent more than 60 years of his life traveling 35,000 miles on his horse across the United Kingdom, spreading his abolitionist propaganda everywhere. He had a complete burnout. After 7 years, he was so tired, he couldn't walk the stairs anymore. When he started speaking, he had to sweat profusely. He was just a broken man. But for me, the point is he did it. He made a monument of his life. And that's why historians like me still write about people like Thomas Clarkson. And that is the invitation of this book I've written, Moral Ambition, is that we can follow in the footsteps of the pioneers who came before us.
So one more question before we wrap up. So we want to talk about the system because I have a lot of friends working on big tech companies and they work there because, they get paid a lot. So do you think we need to change the whole system to allocate the most talented, most exciting people, most skilled people to change the whole system?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The allocation of talent is one of the most important variables in any society. And the way we currently allocate talent is insane. It is leading to societal ruin. Indeed, many of our best and brightest are working, in the new addiction industries. They're making people addicted on apps, on social media. They're destroying the social contract, the social fabric. It's pretty bad. Now, how can we change the allocation of talent? Sure, money matters. I'm someone who says governments, for example, who should pay higher salaries to people who have really important roles in the public sector, right? I think we should learn from countries like Singapore, where, some of the smartest people, some of the government ministers, they have really high salaries because they have the most important jobs. I think that makes a lot of sense, to be honest. Like, why does, say, the Minister of Healthcare often earn less than the CEO of some crappy BS company that produces, some silly app? That is very weird, if you think about it a bit longer. But the other thing that really helps in the allocation of talent is prestige, right? So we got to make doing good more prestigious. This is one of the reasons why we started a fellowship at Harvard with my organization, the School for Moral Ambition. So we said, we are going to recruit the best students at the most prestigious university in the world to not go and spend the summer at McKinsey or Goldman Sachs. No, instead, they will spend the summer at one of the most impactful nonprofits in the whole world, fighting global poverty, working to prevent the next pandemic. And you know what? It's going to be extremely hard to get into that fellowship. So Harvard's acceptance rate is 3%. Of our fellowship, we just accept around 10% of those 3%. So these are really some of the most exceptional kids in the whole world. And we had so much fun with this. So at Harvard, we had these big posters everywhere that said, you didn't fight your way into Harvard to end up in a bullshit job. So this is how we are trying to change the culture, change the narrative.
I agree, because I have a lot of friends going to consulting companies. They're creating just cool slides, and that's their job. I want them to go to a...
Yeah. And it is just boring. It's a free country, right? Yeah. If people want to be boring, that is okay, I guess. But you have only one life on this planet, right? It's this very precious thing, and you might as well do something with it that is actually interesting. Humans are herd animals. And maybe that is particularly true, by the way, for Japanese culture, right? Where there are so many subtle social cues, and why it's often very hard to integrate as an outsider and a foreigner, because it takes a lifetime to understand how to actually behave properly. And most people are stuck in that phase their entire life. Most people are stuck in that social phase their entire life. But you can get to a third phase, and that is the self-authored phase. That is when you start to realize that you are the master of your fate. You are the captain of your own ship, right? And that doesn't mean you need to throw everything away that people taught you. But in the end, you can make a monument of your own life, right? You can transcend the social obligations. And that is also very much what moral ambition is about. It is the hard path. Yeah. It is the unusual path. But in the end, it is a much more meaningful path.
Thank you so much. I think that's the perfect way to end this show. So I highly recommend this book to our audience. It's a beautiful cover. It's beautiful, the Japanese version. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it yet. So now I'm very
This is the cover. Yes. I like it. Your editor did a good job.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Well, my publisher is amazing.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to be there in Japan again.
Yes, I want to see you again. So thank you for joining our show, and I really enjoyed the conversation. So Rutger Bregman, thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me.